Welcome to the Human Everywhere podcast. I am one of your hosts, Jason Bott. Human Everywhere is a production of Deep Space Predictive. And our focus for Human Everywhere is to look at the future of space exploration and make sure that we are expanding just beyond the technical aspects of propulsion, beyond computing, beyond technology. And remember that at the core of all exploration is the human ambition to see what is out there. So today we have an amazing guest. But first of all, let me introduce my co-host and our co-founder. Ubi, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hello, hello. Yes, my name is Ubi Simigneti. My real first name is Ubaldo. I am one of the co-founders of Deep Space Predictive, and I'm just very excited to always be here and talking about this very applicable, right, subject to all of us on Earth, right? And I'm a Star Trek fan. You know, Star Wars, Star Trek, we've talked about this before. But for me, Star Trek, it's that ideal, right? It's just that it's what it can represent and that I feel like it's just right there, right? So anyway, I'm excited to be here. Thank you. Aliris, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, UV. Thanks, Jason. So my name is Aliris Allman, and I'm the founder of Deep Space Predictive. And as we talk, as UV and Jason have already talked about, you know, we are human wherever we go. That's just, we can't not be who we are. And a lot of my research and inspiration for founding Deep Space Predictive is recognizing that humanity. And this is a wonderful extension of having that conversation beyond the technical, beyond the research, and getting into the reality of who we are and what we take when we go into space. And I'm super excited to have Dr. Sian Proctor here with us today. She is Inspiration4 mission pilot, a historic flight, becoming a commercial astronaut, being a pilot, and the first Black woman to be doing that, which is always exciting. And what's exciting for me is that she is a JEDI for space, justice, equality, diversity, inclusiveness. I have created a JEDI Council in one of my organizations. And so I'm so inspired by you, Dr. Proctor. So I'm so wanting to know that talk that you gave spurred some action into our Colorado Space Business Roundtable. So with that, thank you for coming. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. I'm just thrilled. It's great to see you again and be able to come and talk about my experience, but also the future of human spaceflight and how we're writing that narrative now, and how do we make that a JEDI space, and how do we keep that human element always present in our thinking.
Yeah, so since you're flying, I mean, you've always been involved in space, in the pursuit of it, in different aspects and different projects. I know one of your latest ones is Star Harbor, which is where we started to get introduced. So tell us a little bit about Star Harbor.
Yes, sorry, I was unmuting. What's great about Star Harbor is it's a spaceflight training academy, basically. I like to think of it as your modern day Starfleet Academy. You remember, you just say how, this whole idea of how do you build and prepare people for the future of humanity permanently working, living, and playing in space, and not just, you know, for a small elite group of individuals, but everyday people living on the moon, Mars, low Earth orbit, all of those things, and hopefully going beyond. And so to get people flight ready, you got to get them trained here on Earth. And so we're looking at, I'm thrilled to be part of the Star Harbor team. And our mission is basically to cultivate a sustainable and thriving future for all of those on and off planet. And so we're going to have a 767, Boeing 767 for parabolic flights. We're going to have a centrifuge. We're going to have a neutral buoyancy tank, hypobaric and hyperbaric chambers, but also all kinds of facilities. There's going to be a pie center for the public to come in and interact with us. And, you know, it's just going to be a really fun, interesting environment for research and development, bringing together all types of stakeholders from the, the business world, from NGOs, from, universities and K-12 and government entities. And how do you bring them together into a, to some extent, a think tank environment for the future of space, human space exploration?
I mean, that's really exciting. And it's, that's in Colorado, or you're kind of building, I think there's land and you're going to build a lot of things here in Colorado.
And so it's so exciting because, Colorado's Aerospace Alley, and just really getting into this, all of the amazing companies that are existing there, the universities, the support, and even like, again, that educational system being, I'm the VP of education. And so how do we include that, because that's the foundation in the future. And having a place where, again, a lot of that is research and development, thinking about products in the future, but also there's a big social component to this, in a sense of how do you create good crew cohesion? How do you understand people's strengths? How do you how do you learn about the psychology of human spaceflight and the impact? Food and mood is a big one that I like to think about, because we don't talk about that a lot, but man, if you're hangry up in space, what does that look like?
So true.
And so art in space, music, all the things, how do we bring, the humanity, the human part to space with us and keep that alive and thriving? But also, how do we solve for space equals solving for Earth?
Well, that's a good segue into kind of one of the main topics we wanted to talk about. Was solving for space is actually in a lot of ways solving for Earth, because we talked previously, when we were kind of prepping for this, about the disconnect that exists between kind of the general population and those small group of people who currently have access to space. Can you talk about that? Like, what is it about going to space? And then this will lead into a great conversation that Aliris and Jason wanted to talk about, as how do you define an astronaut? But first of all, like, why is it our story, and how do we connect the dots for everybody about going to space?
Well, I think a big part of the disconnect is people don't see the relevance of what we do up there to connecting to their everyday lives. And that's a story that we need to keep telling and developing, because when we think about, for example, setting up a lunar base, that has to be efficiency in water, energy, waste management, food, all of the things that we think, that we actually have problems with here on Earth. We have to solve those same challenges, the things that we need to survive, but in the extreme, most harsh environment, the moon or space. And up there, because it's not the plentiful, bountiful Earth, even though that's to some extent a misconception, because Earth has limited resources. But up there are no resources but the ones we have to bring to survive. And so they have to be extremely efficient. So you can imagine thinking about just water and how we are going to handle water, getting water there, whether we're going to take it from the rocks or existing ice on the moon, or, but how do we filter it? How do we circulate it? How do we reuse it? All of those things. And that's technology that needs to be developed. And that's technology that's going to be developed here on Earth. And that's the technology that, because it's such high efficiency, it comes back to making us efficient here. I mean, just thinking about our phones and cell phone and satellite technology wouldn't exist without space technology. I mean, this is space on Earth, and we don't talk about space on Earth enough. But it's in our lives, everything that we do, and literally connected to us everywhere we go.
Absolutely. It's so interesting as you talk about that connection. It truly is an education piece. It's not, we talk about the R&D and how do you explain the R&D, but it's also educating the public about, you know, the reason they can watch their TikToks is because they're satellites. You know, that might, it's, you know, just speaking, just getting right down to the point. If you want to make those sports bets, you need your satellites.
You do, or just even the microelectronics, you know, everything has to be smaller and more efficient for space, because sending things, getting out of the Earth's gravity well, it takes a lot of energy. And so we want light, fast, efficient, all of that. And that's a driving force in how we're, you know, dealing with space technology. And that all leads to, again, the efficiencies we see around us and use every single day. But that narrative needs to be told, that story. And that's why this conversation is so relevant.
Definitely.
So curious, hopping a little bit over, because I think, one, I still want to dig a little bit more into your incredible journey, because I know we've hopped right on into Star Harbor and all the ideas about space, but your journey itself has been really incredibly remarkable. And I think we need to make sure that we are celebrating what you've done. But I also want to discuss the fact of what you have done with Star Harbor, SpaceX, and put that in the larger picture. But maybe just give us a little bit of a background, what you've done, and tell us a little bit about that flight that you've gone on.
Yeah, you know, last year was it was a real game changer, because about this time last year, Inspiration4 was announced through the Super Bowl that that they were doing the first all-civilian mission to orbit, and that 2 people could win a seat. One was the generosity seat. By donating to St. Jude Children's Research Hospital, you could be entered in to win that. And then the other one was the prosperity seat, where you showed your entrepreneurial spirit and opened up a shop to sell some type of service, and then created a 2-minute and 20-second Twitter video. You could win your spot to space. And I have been chasing space my entire life. I was born on Guam because my dad was working at the NASA tracking station during the Apollo missions. And so I grew up with Neil Armstrong's autograph to my dad and all this other space memorabilia. And being a science kid, I had my telescope early and was looking up at the stars and thinking, how do I get there? And so I entered both contests, and I ended up winning the prosperity seat. And I did it as an artist and a poet, even though I'm a geoscientist and almost NASA astronaut.
Oh, that is absolutely remarkable. Let me ask you a little bit, because this is, if you go on forums, you go on this fact, it actually really caught a lot of, you know, the Twitterverse when Bezos sent up his team. What is the definition of an astronaut? Because there is that very question. I've heard everybody say, well, it's, you know, if you got to go through NASA's whatever 72, 42-step process, that defines you as an astronaut. Or, you know, you've at least got to have some training. You know, what is the definition in your mind? And I also want to possibly link into the question of the fact that I think the term astronaut helps us keep the idea of human everywhere involved in the process, because of that Latin root of not, the fact that it takes an action to be involved, that you're part of the exploration. But I'd like to get your perspective.
Well, you know, I just happened to pull up the definition because I like to use it. According to Oxford, the definition of an astronaut is a person who is trained to travel in a spacecraft. Interesting, right? Yeah. And so if you think about that, a person who is trained to travel in a spacecraft versus, the definition of, well, where is space? And so when we think of the Kármán line, and this is the definition of that, it is 100, let me get that straight. It is 54 nautical miles up, or 100 kilometers up above the Earth's surface, where we consider the amount of molecules, per like square inch or whatever that is so minute that you're basically in the vacuum of space. And so there's this high idea of, the definition, you're training to go up in a spacecraft versus a line that you might have to cross to be considered in space and an astronaut. Now, what's interesting when we look at the history of NASA and astronauts, it was a selection process. You got selected to become an astronaut, and you began training. But training did not guarantee flight. but you still have, there's a lot of astronauts, NASA astronauts out there that never made it to space. And so when we're talking about defining, if we go by the traditional Oxford, if you've been training to go on a spacecraft mission, you could be considered an astronaut, right? But you don't get your astronaut wings until you've crossed what we call typically the Kármán line, which is that 100-kilometer mark. And so there's, I think that those are interesting things to debate about. But for me, anybody who is who goes to space, in my opinion, who makes it up there, whether it's suborbital or orbital, is an astronaut. You have gone up and done something. You've gone up to a line. You've seen the Earth from a perspective that has fundamentally changed you and done something that's amazing. You've seen something and experienced something that is just out of this world. And as a result, you're an astronaut. And so I don't have a problem with being lumped with the suborbitals, but I do say that going orbital is far more challenging than suborbital. And so the amount of inherent risk of becoming an orbital astronaut is definitely a difference.
Well, and I always, this makes me think back to Frank White, who we had on the podcast, and he talks about the Earth being a spaceship. So in essence, we're sort of all astronauts. So that's why I love this conversation, because I think it's part of getting rid of that disconnect. That's part of getting every human being on this planet to kind of accept that this is a part of their story. And there are so many aspects to it. And that's where I think, you talked about eliteness. I think that eliteness that sort of exists is part of the issue, right? Because it's creating a definition that's not necessarily true. It's just by whether you have the money to do it, or, whether one of the very, very, very few to get into NASA. But at the end of the day, we're all on this spaceship. We've all been training to be in space. Like I'm an astronaut,
right.
And like there's just steps to it.
There are, and it's perspective, and how you view yourself on Starship Earth versus SpaceX, or SpaceX's Starship in the future. And I like to think about the future when people are being born on the moon or Mars, and their ancestors were astronauts to get there. Now they're on a totally different body than the Earth. Now, are you an astronaut? And thinking about that, the future of that is so fascinating. But the fundamental question is access. How do we create a JEDI space, a just, equitable, diverse, and inclusive space, so that more people have the ability to go? Now, right now, because it's so expensive to get off Starship Earth, the cost, fundamentally, we have to bring down the cost that enables access. And a lot of people talk about, billionaires being able to afford and go on these flights. Well, this is where I love Inspiration4, because it said, Jerry came in and said, I can do this and I can take whoever I want, but I want to try and do this right. I want to do it where I'm giving access to people who normally wouldn't have access. And I also want to solve, for issues on Earth. And by throwing in the $200 million fundraiser for St. Jude Children's Research Hospital, flying Haley as the first childhood cancer survivor and first person with a prosthesis in her leg, having me as the first Black female pilot of a spacecraft, having Chris Simbrowski as, he won his ticket by donating. And, he's a dad, not that other NASA astronauts aren't, but he never expected to go to space. He always talks about how he was always going to be the guy who supports others to be able to go and do that. And then here he was riding a rocket to space. That's where you start working towards that JEDI space and having that conversation by getting the people who have the access right now to be thoughtful about their intentions of who gets selected and how and what they're going to do and the messaging around it.
Oh,
No, go ahead. There's Sawyer's.
One thing that's interesting is we want to inspire, and there's the argument of like, who gets to go? I guess one of my questions, would love your opinion on how do we inspire people to want to go? And how do we make it okay for those who will support us going, but really just don't want to go, from a cultural perspective, because there are some things that we have to honor that, people have different relationships with space. And while we are like, let's all go, let's do this. Some cultures are like, no, but we'll support you. And how do we support them in supporting us with their no?
Oh, I totally agree. And I think that, again, that's the storytelling aspect of human spaceflight, is making connections with people around the world and having conversations about who wants to go to space and why. And then also who doesn't want to go to space and why, and how do we support each other with these different viewpoints. But the whole point is that we all make that connection of the importance of why we need to go as humans to space, and why that is an endeavor worth supporting. And I think that for me, and when I think of a JEDI space, the biggest issue is we don't have enough people of color and even women applying to be part of that space. When I was looking at, the European Space Agency pushed out how many people applied for their astronaut selection process, which is happening right now. And they're the first ones to say, yeah, we will look at people with certain types of disabilities to be able to apply for the first time ever. But they broke it down by countries of how many women and men applied, and then how many got moved on to the second round. And the percent of just, men to women, I would say it was still a quarter or less, typically women to men, so 25% women to 75% men. And then they didn't get into the ethnic and, racial breakdowns of those. But we have to have people being able to see themselves this as a career, or this is a thing that they want to do before we can have that JEDI space. And so one of the things that I've come back from my experience and wanting to share is talking to underrepresented communities and sharing my experience and my roadmap to get there, and why this is something worth pursuing, and that it's a long haul game. It took me over 50 years to get there, but I did it, and having that hope for the future, because fundamentally it's about a positive hope for the future. And as an Afrofuturist artist and poet, that's something that I want to do too. I don't want a future that is a Mad Max.
Yeah.
I want Star Trek. I don't even want Star Wars. No, I want Star Trek. And so having that vision in mind is important.
It's interesting you bring up that one of the most interesting phrases is Afrofuturist, because we've seen both kind of a revival of that in the recent years. I mean, or as some would say, it's always been, there's not been a revival. It's just the fact is, it hit the forefront of, public consciousness. But what I love that what you said is most people tie Afrofuturism entirely towards fiction writing. Yeah. And immediately their brains go to Octavia Butler, they go down to N.K. Jemisin, they go down that route. But you reference poet and art. So walk me through, how do you explore Afrofuturism as a poet? I'm very curious about that.
Yeah, so a lot of it is my art and poetry are tied together. And so when I talk about Afrofuturism artists, I have three main characters that I've kind of created. One is my Astronaut, and that is just this idea of somebody who is faceless, dancing on the moon and Mars. It's typically a female character. And it really kind of reminds me a lot of the Little Prince, the book, where and traveling among the stars and kind of dancing your way there. Well, what would that look like for a person of color? And how do you get there? And so one of the pieces that I've created is called Artemis Rising. And it's this whole idea of the Artemis program and going back to the moon. And when we go back to the moon, I wrote this poem, and I'm just going to read it to you to give you this idea of the Afrofuturism. So the art is a Black female in a spacesuit reaching for the moon. That's the art piece. And then the poem is this: will you know my name as deep as I know yours? Will you embrace me the way you did him? I don't get the luxury of choice, only the sorrow of never being first. They say it's okay, you still belong, but we know the truth. Only select tokens will be taken at this entrance booth. And so this whole idea of the Black female, like I'm shocked that I'm the first Black female pilot of a spacecraft and to have that honor, but typically, but I'm not the first person to do that. You had the white male pilot of a spacecraft. You had the Black male pilot of a spacecraft. You had the white female pilot of the spacecraft. You know, so I may be the first, but I am in the end of the line of the first. And so, you know, when we think about NASA's messaging, they say we're gonna send the first female and the first person of color. You know, messaging used to be, we're going to send the first female and then the next male. And then they said they say now the first female and the first person of color. Well, they can be one and the same.
Right.
You know, we can check that box with one, you know, or why does it have to be a choice? I mean, oh my goodness, we're amazing people. We have amazing engineers. Build a platform that folds out and then opens up so two people can stand on it at the same time and step onto the moon together. Wow, novel idea. Could we do that? I mean, to me, that's the JEDI space of well, okay, how do we bring as many people along, and what kind of message do we want to give? And I think that just, we need to keep talking about this so that the people who are making the decisions and are selecting will hear us and will want to strive for that JEDI space.
It is interesting that you titled your poem Artemis, and what you, I think, just described reflects a major shift in almost an archetypal understanding of the way that we approach space. To me, everything that has been challenging about NASA and space exploration for the last how many ever years, 50, is really tied to the fact that we chose as our emblem Apollo. This idea of let's shoot to the sun, let's go after this thing, but it was a very white male-centered focus of aggression and achievement and empowerment, but without a desire to stay. I think that's one of the things that's interesting, is that one, Artemis is a sister, but more than that is that Artemis abides. When you look at the classical mythology, it is a very different spirit in that she's not just going to conquer, she's going to land, and more so than that, bring with her the very things that you are talking about, bringing art with her, bringing those aspects of humanity. Apollo doesn't take humanity with us. If we're lucky, we get to follow it instead. But Artemis changes that dynamic. And I think it's key that you said that. You're right. It's, you know, for me, my degree is in creative writing and literature and mythology, and I'm already picking apart your poem and looking at it, because I think we could probably do another 30 minutes just on that. That final two lines are potent and haunting. Only select tokens will be taken at this entrance booth, because I think it does acknowledge the fact that there is still, we are not past the Apollo mentality, and that we have to be careful that all humans are not going to be there.
We talking about not past the Apollo. You just have to look at the NASA selection. This last one. Like it was 9 out of 10 were military background.
Yeah.
And all of the females were white. There was
Yeah.
no diversity in any of the females. So that tells me, okay, the female footsteps on the moon, are they going to be a white female? Absolutely, because the person of color is next in line, and that might be a man or a woman, but and I'm just like, yeah, but fingers crossed. Jessica Watkins, she's in the running. She's gonna be going up with the Crew 4 launch that's coming up with NASA, and she's a geologist, and so I'm partial to that. She's a Black female geologist. So, but the whole idea of you're sending a message. Yeah. And to me, when I saw who they selected in this last one, I'm like, oh, you still have to be military and you have to be pretty much white. Yeah.
You
can be an older white male, but you can't be an older white female.
No, that's true. We're still intoxicated by the myth of the right stuff. I mean, as long ago as that is really what we're beholden to.
But this is why I love, what private space is doing. Because literally with the Polaris program, that you're sending civilians to orbit further out than the International Space Station, and they're going to be doing a spacewalk.
Yeah.
What?
Yeah.
I mean, that is freaking awesome.
Yeah. Well, it's that intentionality. That's why I love these conversations. Like we have to intentionally, because we can't leave it up to NASA anymore. Right? Like it's on all of us to move this conversation forward. It makes me think about building products, companies who build products, right? Like if you've got a all white male team of developers building a product, what are they going to build? A product for, frankly, a small minority of people on the planet. And it's, like the first version of the Apple Watch couldn't measure the heart rate of Black skin, right? Like they couldn't, because the people who developed it weren't people of color, right?
Well,
so they developed
the facial recognition, right?
The facial recognition, all of that, right? Like it's like, so of course we're the conversation of all of us going to space is sort of slowed down or focused only on the right stuff, right? As defined by white males, and so it's so powerful because it's such a part of just the conversation that's going on right now.
I also should point out so that was one of my 3 characters, and my other one, and Alaris, I think you'll appreciate this. It's Acrobatica, and so it gets into the conversation of as we go to the moon and Mars and beyond, how much human is going to be going with us in order to survive? How much of us will need to be augmented to actually really truly survive? And one of the big hitches that a lot of people don't talk about is not just the fact that to be able to be sustainable on the moon and Mars, reproduction. And so what does that look like? Because if we can't reproduce among the stars, how are we going to continue onward? And so technology, again, Haley went with a prosthesis. What kind of technology will we adapt or find necessary? Not, fundamentally necessary in order to live and work and play among the stars.
Right, and that is that's where we started. We want to live and play among the stars. We want to take all of ourselves, even if some of ourselves are augmented, whatever that is. Are we taking us as humans or as people? And what does all that mean? And it's been such a wonderful conversation with you, Dr. Proctor. And we're gonna start to wrap up here. We've talked about where we're going, who gets to go. Loved your poetry, like Jason said. That last line, I'm like, okay, it just sent chills. And it's so, so true. What are some last words you'd like to leave with us and, have us to be grounded, but also think toward the stars?
Well, I think that brings in my last character, and that's Afro Gaia. And so, and that's Mother Earth. And so Afro-Gaia is all about how, you know, she's watching. We all come from Africa. So this is talking about the Earth as a living system that is a part of us, and we're a part of it. But it's Afrocentric again, and the fact that humans came out of Africa, and what does that mean for the future? How do we be good stewards of Afro-Gaia, and or other words, Mother Earth, as we venture out into the stars? And so there's no better place than home. Starship Earth is number one, and everything we do out there needs to serve us back here, and making us into the, you know, the utopian planet that we can be when we learn to cooperate and work together and strive for that JEDI space here on Earth.
You keep showing photos of your book. Where can people find that? And if they want to order copies of that?
It's on Amazon. Now you can Google me on Amazon, Sian Proctor, but it will change it to Stan Proctor. So you have to click right. Sian. No, you got to be like, no, I really want SIAN yeah. Proctor. It's called A Space to Inspire the Art of Inspiration. And it's, I hope that you love it, and let me know which poem you liked the most and why. I self-published, so it's my precious little thing here.
Fantastic. Well, Dr. Proctor, we so enjoyed our time with you. You have been an incredible inspiration, and we fully recognize someone who galvanizes with our message of human everywhere. And it is fantastic to have you involved in the space community and being able to make waves like you are. And so we deeply appreciate your time here with us. On behalf of Deep Space Predictive and Human Everywhere, I am Jason Bott, along with Ubi Seminary and Aliris Allman, and we want to thank you all for joining us for today's podcast.
Bye, everyone. Thanks for listening.
Thank you.